This week's mentorship hour tackled everything from tombstone hairs to multiple dermal papillae and learning to fine-tune galvanic or high-frequency settings.
Hello.
I am pulling up the questions because I had the questions.
Do you want me to start with my 2 from the emails?
Yeah,
so we can
let's do
just
that.
kind of finish wrapping those up?
Yep.
Okay. So I have this email has 3 separate questions. So I'll just start kind of with the first one. So are tombstone hairs from treating a follicle intelligence stage, or can it be also from treating an anagen hair treating a hair in anagen stage? So what's a tombstone? I guess is the first part of the question.
You start on this because I literally just
Sure. Well, I think that it's kind of interesting to talk about. I mean, tombstones, I feel like they were first introduced in the Hinkle book.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a fairly old terminology. The way that I always look at a tombstone, by the way, is just like a remnant piece of hair that just kind of isn't attached to anything and just eventually kind of falls out on its own. That's a tombstone. Sometimes we see that. I tend to see it the most when I'm about to kind of go down a stair step. So when we're shifting in our treatment plan. And so you have this one or 2 appointments where like you have a lot of just hairs that aren't even attached to anything. They're just like pieces of hairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's always an indicator to me that we're about to shift down a stair step, because there's like a lot of like pieces of hairs that just are not attached to anything and are kind of dead. Those are what I consider tombstones. So it's like the death of a cycle.
The way I consider a tombstone is that a lot of times it is a hair that's just kind of been hanging out, but it hasn't done the proper way of shedding out of the body. And so sometimes it kind of has buildup around it and it looks substantially different because of that buildup, whether it might be like hairs that kind of accumulate and you end up with that like basically plug style of a hair. And those are always fun, like on the big beards and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of see those. I don't know about you guys, but I love taking those out and then like just kind of counting to see how many cycles have stuck around as that tombstone. But the best description of it is it was a hair that it's dead. It's no longer giving anything of sustenance to like be taken out appropriately. And so it's just extracted like similar to like a blackhead. Now, obviously not everybody can do extractions depending on like where you're at in the world and like that kind of stuff. You might not be able to extract a tombstone like a blackhead. But a lot of times you can kind of go in there and rotate your filament around there. And if it is kind of like stuck inside the follicle, you can kind of get it to release by just rotating that filament in there. I will say that anaphoresis component to treatments really does help to kind of start to break down the what's the word I'm looking for? The hair debris that's in there and allows
keratin buildup.
Keratin, thank you. Oh my God, I do electrolysis for a living. My brain could not come up with the word keratin right now. So can you get that hair debris? There we go. And it could break that down. I do really like that in those cases, but you don't actually come across as many tombstones as you'd expect to see unless someone doesn't have good turnover to their skin and their hair in the first place. So if you are coming across a lot of those, sometimes it's a little bit of like, okay, it's time to prep the skin for like the work we're about to really jump into. I think that's big.
I guess like when we're going back to how the question was asked, let me go back to kind of, let's see if we've answered this. So is it treating a hair intelligence stage? Or is it treating a hair in anagen? I would say that it's neither, right? So I guess you can use intelligent, but it's not attached.
Yeah, it's not attached. So there's no,
it's a remnant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then Anita, it's, and Sue also, ended up messaging it tombstone. So like, when you die.
Like in a cemetery.
Cemetery. I don't know if that's like a global thing or if that's a US thing. I don't know what people do. Like it's the little dead piece of concrete.
No, I just heard 2 or twin stones. The accent, I couldn't get it, but then after I got it.
Understood. Understood. What was the next part of that question?
Okay, so then it said, so two hairs in the same follicle. So can you have two hairs in the same follicles, or are they each in their own follicle? Or is it that the follicle has two dermal papillas and can grow out of the same follicle? I feel like somebody was reading the Hinkle book.
I know. Okay. Think of it this way. You have sometimes your sidewalls to your hair follicle can be weak enough for the adjoining hair next door to kind of creep in and come out the same hair shaft. My gosh, my brain is just not giving me words right now. And so you do have two dermal papillas, but they are not growing from the same dermal papilla in that space. There is some people out there that will say, and this happens a lot in the blend and galvanic community, and it's not something I really subscribe to. And I will say that. And the reason I don't subscribe to it is because the amount of lye that I'm about to talk about would have to be pretty substantial, and that could cause more irritation that's not a lack of benefit for certain. So when you think about this in the galvanic and blend communities, somewhere along the way, somebody said, oh, if I apply enough blend or galvanic to the area, that lye will build to the point where it pours into the surrounding follicles. There's a lot that has to go wrong for that to happen. And that's obviously, this is unstudied since 1958. So like when I say this, I'm not saying that like anecdotally they might not see some change, but it has not been researched to the point where I, as somebody who likes galvanic and blend, feel that it would be beneficial. That being said, multi-needle, with the sheer volume of lye that we're creating during that time over that course of that space, you do have more spillover or traveling of your lye bubbles. And so you will see some breakdown of the other hair, but it's not enough to detach it. A lot of times you have to like redirect your insertion to get them both to detach without pluck. So there's that component in that space. Additionally, your lye goes along the outside of the filament. And Joanie, you had this really beautiful picture of a filament with lye bubbles around the outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that accessible on your computer? Because I want you guys to see how much lye is in there. You're not creating substantial amounts of growth. Now, I will say, when I talk about how that can travel when you're working on a distorted hair, that does kind of hit the same point of like, we're traveling, but we're in that same follicle. We're not moving outside of that tissue.
I also think that I think that most of the time, when you're talking about twin hairs, I don't think they come from the same follicle. I think one dermal papilla, one follicle, they can be really, really, really close together. And those are the ones where you have that, call them twins or triplets, right? So, but you do need to do individual insertions. Even with thermolysis, sometimes you see it. Let's say you do an insertion here in the middle one, and then you do one there. Sometimes the one next to it, there's enough spillover that you can actually cook the neighboring one. But I don't know if that's a positive thing, right? So that's kind of overcooking stuff a little bit.
The way I kind of look at it, and you guys are gonna so we're gonna look at my really bad drawing so this is the epidermis, okay? And I'm not gonna create the whole follicle in here, but I want you guys to think of this as being one hair follicle, okay? And then right next to it, you are basically traveling really close.
Mm-hmm.
But there is enough breakage, just like you have an ingrown hair, there's enough ability to break through the components towards the top of the hair. I don't think it's down low. I think it usually is up fairly high. That in this zone right here, there's a little piece of tissue that's between those two hairs, in which you might, if you're not careful enough in your insertion, you might break that little piece and it feels like you can get around in there a little bit more. But it really is still kind of you're going in for an insertion and you have to back out and then follow that next insertion to get to the next point. And you'll feel it.
Yeah. And, I've heard of some teachings where they would say like kind of poke in between the two and zap the two at the same time. That's another thing that I don't tend to adhere to. I think insertions, should be inside the hair follicles, not really, unless by accident you're outside, but not on purpose.
And if you're outside,
this is what you're talking about?
yes. So if you look, thank you. I was like, I love this picture. I know that it sounds silly. This is like my little zapper moment. Look at how much lye is growing outwards and downwards. So on a hair that you're going to be dealing with, like a terminal growth where you're going to see more of those twin papillae looking hairs, the twins that are next to each other, that we're really dealing with a very small amount of lye along the edge of the filament. It is a longer filament because you're dealing with a terminal hair. And so you can see that growth along the full length of it. But just like heat, it travels upwards and outwards as you're in there for a longer time. So the reason you're seeing that growth happen usually has more to do with like your intensity, your milliamperes was too high for too long, that now we have spillover. But it's not spilling outwards because it's a cup. You're not dealing with a funnel.
Okay, so hopefully that made sense. And so the last one, so are all hairs considered club hairs? So again, this is something that was kind of from the Hinkle text. I always pictured a club hair just being another word for intelligent hair.
Yeah.
So you can just kind of,
intelligent club is no, because when we think of a club hair, we're thinking of the life cycle of a hair, and you're just dealing with the end of that life cycle. It's so funny. I have my Hinkle book that's my computer sitting on top of it right now because I need to like raise myself up a little bit today. But is some really cool imagery that we were talking about last night in Zapping Hour, where we were discussing like the different goals and looks of a hair as you are learning how to do electrolysis. And as we become a better electrologist, and the Hinkle text did a good job of drawing this out, I would like to see this updated and digitized and that kind of stuff, because it shows you kind of like that fibrous end of a hair when it's undertreated, or it shows you like kind of the dehydration of that hair, or how that hair starts to shift in its different life cycles. And I think that that's a good opportunity for people to start realizing the vast.
I have a couple Hinkle books up here. If you want, I can go take a quick look and see if I can find the image real quick.
I think you guys are going to see my computer get lower for a second. Because I have it like right here. It is within, and
the Hinkle book is available as a free download. So
on archive.net.
Yeah. So if you don't have that book, obviously they don't print it anymore.
Today's broadcast is brought to you by the California Electrology Academy, a premier school dedicated to advancing the art and science of electrolysis. Whether you're just starting out or pursuing advanced training, the Academy provides hands-on education and mentorship to help you succeed. Learn more at electrologyacademy.com.
So on page 166, it starts in there where it talks about your different styles of what the hairs might look like time. And this is just a really good representation of things that we come across as an electrologist early on. The thing I like about this is he goes into descriptions of like what you are seeing within each type of hair. So underneath magnification, and this is where it gets really cool. And I would love to have like all the time in the world to like kind of come back to doing a new heavy detail description of electrology, because we haven't had anything like that with the Hinkle text in a long time. But it shows you like what each one of those really means. And I have each one of those pictures and the little blurbs already taken a picture of it and like made into like little black and white. So if you guys are ever like, hey, like I need to see what you're talking about, archive.net definitely has the Hinkle on there for free, but I'm always willing to just upload those into like the video notes of this so that you guys can see what I'm talking about in that space. But I think it is a pretty cool graphic that we haven't really seen in a long time.
Okay. So that kind of is pretty much lots of terminology from the Hinkle book that we've, we don't really use that much anymore, but it's good to go back and kind of see that, it's not foreign.
Yeah.
Okay. So our
Grior's text.
What was that?
Hinkle and Grior's, Grior, I think is how you say his last name. I could be saying it wrong. Cool, you have a PDF of it. They have a lot of heavy science, but it's old science. If we're thinking of like 58 to like 89, I think was Grior. And so there's a lot of insensitive terminology in there, stuff that's not relevant anymore, stuff that we've proven otherwise. So I wouldn't look at the texts as
truth. Yeah, for sure.
As that
absolute truth. Yeah, for sure.
So I am going to.
I have another question then I'm done with the stuff that I have that was sent in. So thank you for those that send in questions. We love to kind of start with that because that's the most pertinent. So here's the next one. Is there anything anywhere where we discuss settings, how to go about finding and fine-tuning settings for each client? So like starting points, how to step up galvanic, HF, and timing. This person feels like they didn't get enough of that in school, and so they feel like they feel inadequate in this area at times. So it's kind of like, I guess, finding a starting point and working to a working point. And how do we kind of go about doing that?
So, I mean, we had this conversation not long ago in the classroom where I think a lot of people don't realize that like manual electrolysis is working outside of your presets for usually a longer time for a lower intensity. And there's that component to it. I like to see what the recommended ranges are from the manufacturer as a starting point, because they have done the most extensive research with their machine in regards to those hair types before they release it to the public. That does not mean that I like presets, okay? But what I like about it, and this is something that's really cool I know that it is within Apple's machines and Silhouette Tone machines, is you have like your units of light output put on there, you have your units of energy or energy level. And I think it's really important to get to know those equations for your machine. So if you're trying to figure out like what that math looks like and to reverse it backwards, and Apple's had this in their 2015 lecture that slides from when they released the machine, where it talks about like what that EL should be when it's in a ITH, an IBL, or an Ionix stainless. And like what those ELs change to based on this, like the surface area of conduction and that kind of stuff, alongside of the machine's capabilities. What I like to do is reverse it. So if it tells me that it recommends me to sit at an output of 20, for example, that 20 is my final number. How I can divide that formula can change a lot. And that's the part that becomes finding your working point and seeing how the skin reacts. So if I know, for example, I'm going to use Apple's in this moment, I need 200 EL to epilate this hair appropriately based on what the manufacturer is saying. Like this is the recommended range. I then can say, what do I need to do with my machine in different energy sets to get myself back to 200? Okay, so sometimes like as a teacher, I'll go over to the machine and it's like, okay, what's the response of the skin that we're seeing? Are we seeing like no extraction? We're hearing crackling. We're hearing it seems very is brittle. Okay, these are all telling me like hot, hot, hot. Okay, and it's telling me that we're working too hot for the time that I need to be in that follicle. Okay, and so that starts to tell me to bring down one side so I can bring up the other. Because if I still need that 200, I need to know what that balance is going to look like. And that's kind of like that when we talk about like the moisture gradient of the skin and like how we're prepping and what that looks like for that patient, we're looking at that equation. So for me, finding a working point tends to be a reverse of whatever the presets recommended within that range for that person within that filament type. Now, Apolis is the only one I'm aware of that also lets you put in the recommended filament, and it will change the math of what that
Only on the Excels, yeah.
only on the Excels, yeah. So when you're thinking about like an ITH versus an IBL, if you put in an IBL, okay, and you go to do thermolysis, those readings will not look the same because you have more surface area. And so what is actually happening in the follicle is not what the computer says. And so that's kind of like, you do have those layers in there as well, alongside of density of the filament or thickness of the filament, alongside of length of the filament. That all is a component to how to set that level up. So my recommendation is like, how do we get ourselves into that space? Is we start to ask ourselves some pretty critical questions in regards to what's happening with the skin and what is my goal for that patient. Obviously, it's every hair is to epilate, but like, what is that going to look like? What am I to expect with this patient? And that's when I start to change my energies off of the presets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you have a machine with presets, I tend to explain, especially with students that are learning the machine or anybody that's learning the machine, that the presets are like your course adjustment. So you start there. You should know, to watch for skin reaction, and you should also know what a correct epilated hair should feel like, right? Those are kind of your, like you said, like your two criterias. So then after that, you pick a preset and you find kind of what works based on those. And that's the course adjustment. Sometimes you can just fly off the preset and then we don't need to do anything else. So meaning that I press on the foot pedal and there was absolutely no skin reaction, and then the hair released and there was absolutely no traction. So if that's how it works, then I've just found my working point. If it does not, then we have to maybe go in a little bit deeper. And this is where understanding time and intensity and how current spreads and when is it best to increase timing versus increasing intensity or vice versa. All of that is that's where you need to understand a little bit more time and intensity, what happens to heating patterns or light distribution, and then you can better manipulate your machine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, where people kind of get a little stuck.
Yeah. And like some of the other things that go into is, like when we were talking about the Hinkle earlier, the math of the Hinkle is set on things that don't equate to today because they didn't have, machine milled filaments that was single use, that was, you had more variables. Your machines, the calibration was much different than it is now. Computerized technology vastly changed the landscape for electrologists. When we used to go in there and when you guys come visit the school and you see the museum, like you go in there and you realize that it was like the old, like analog radios. Okay. And everything was like, well, I think I said it between 2 and 3 last time. Right? But how close to 3 was I, or how close to 2 was I? When you look at, if anybody's lucked out to have a small Instantron, the little Hinkle machines, like the box ones, I can't think what they're called right now. But there was 6 ports on top. And so that was like our first preset looking thing, because what that was 6 batteries. And I have a really cool one at the office that still has the batteries in the bottom of the box. Okay. So we're talking like 1915 to 1925 range in here. And there's batteries connected to each one of these ports. And to strengthen was moving it from a 1 to a 2, because that's now 2 batteries, to a 3, that's now 3 batteries. And that's what they were doing back then. There was no power outlets in that space. But what happens when your battery starts to die? When you start to lose that. So now a number 6 isn't a number 6 anymore. Now a number 6 might be a number 4, right?
That's what I was going to get into, because I had this conversation with students last week. The problem is you get too bogged down with like energy level readouts.
Mhm.
And then, let's say you have the client file, and the client file is for one model, and that can be, 30 sessions long. But what machine they worked on, and even within the same brands of machine, sometimes calibrations can be a little bit different. So you can't get too stuck with that kind of stuff. If
Yeah.
you're going to use units of Lie and energy levels, keep it machine specific, but don't get so stuck on what that number, and it should be this, and I can't, break away from it because then it means that something's wrong. Um, I can even calculate, come up with an arbitrary EL chart for an instantron machine, but it's going to stay specific to instantrons, and it only is going to work if if I compare instantron to instantron, as long as the power output is consistent.
Mhm.
You need an amp meter to be able to check this stuff, which is not something that most people have lying around. So you might not even know. We have a platinum 2 in the school I call the atomic bomb. It's really, really strong. And so you would look at the charts and you would say, well, this person did this client's leg and they only used 92 energy levels. I have a platinum 2. Why do I need 250? Well, because the power output for those machines cannot be compared.
No.
So the readouts really mean nothing. Sometimes I think people get a little too stuck to the point where they'll ignore everything and punch in the same numbers like robots, And so you can't do that. Sometimes it has to be a little bit more freestyled, I think.
Yeah, and that's why I say like presets aren't people. It's like when we think about um our goal at the end of this is like my goal is to epilate that hair, right? With minimal damage to the external tissue. That's it. But that's going to look different treatment to treatment. Last session's notes, while very valid, are last session's notes.
Mhm.
We had today, one of our models had last time they were in a very difficult time with electrolysis, like left in tears that day, kind of, and it was an emotional moment, right? And then today they were just like almost taking a nap on the table, and I was like, that is one time difference. And they're like, I think I had caffeine prior to my session last time, and it's like those are those little nuanced things that happen. You can only control what's in your treatment room. The client is a wild card on the outside of the world, right? I definitely think that it's important to know what a machine's manufacturer would recommend within those
Mhm.
parameters, but it's to go in there and go, okay, this was the parameter that was recommended. We went and played with a blend setting the other day, and like one zap in, I was like, absolutely not. When I heard, how frustrated the student was and how painful that one zap was and that kind of stuff. And it's like, I don't care that the machine says, I recommend this for that person. It wasn't right for that person in that moment. And so we're not doing it. And we go and switch it up. And so it's important to like kind of gauge it in that space. I do like to start low and get my working point to come up. I never want to come in like freaking all the way and then have to wheel myself back, because what's going to happen on the table side is I just came in with max energy. And so now I just activated your nervous system to run away from me. And so if I can bring you up to the point where you can tolerate versus have to bring you back down from, standing on the side of a cliff, it is much easier.
Well,
And
there is such a thing as like getting the nerves warmed up. You know what I mean? Like everybody knows the first couple minutes are going to be the most painful.
Mhm.
Uh, so you have to kind of get clients warmed up to it a little bit. So I also don't think you should start so low that you spend 15 minutes finding your working point. That's a waste of time.
Yeah.
But, you do need to kind of start within the ballpark, but I would say on the lower edge of what your threshold or your range, that's the word I'm looking for, would really be.
And that's like where my students, and I know I have one on here, but like one of the things I talk about is like, if you've never worked with this machine before, drop it by half,
Mhm.
right? Because we know that most likely at half, we're still going to get like, it's going to be a repetition to get us back to or a pulse to get us back to what we were hoping for. But at least I know what that looks like. I know that at the next pulse, if it looks like I shouldn't have been at that high, then I'm going to bring it back down by a quarter. Okay. And then I'm going to go, okay, I know I needed close to a second pulse, but how close? And so that starts to bring me back up in that space. And so it usually only takes a few modifications. Occasionally when you have a person come in there and their hairs are just holding on for dear life and their skin is just really tender, it may take longer because it might be a little bit of hand holding to get you there in that same space. But it should be within your first 5 minutes of treatment. Yeah. Sue says, this needs to be a class for those of us who went to school and we're just working with presets. I would love to be able to help guide you guys through that. I would have to know the kind of things that you would want from that class, because I feel like that is something that we initially teach a lot when we're coming into like a new machine or a new modality. So if you have things that you would love to deep dive into this one subject, we're willing to always build a lecture that is based on that. It's just a matter of like, I don't know what you don't know. So sometimes I need to know a little bit more content there.
Most of the time when we address this sort of question, I mean, it's such a loaded question because there is just like, we can keep talking about it forever, but you have to just kind of break it down to understand, like if I'm talking thermolysis, you have to understand what happens when I increase time, but keep intensity constant. And then what happens when you flip that scenario, we keep timing the same, but we increase intensity. So once you understand and you can picture, and I'm pretty visual, I don't know if you guys see pictures in your brains when you're thinking of stuff, but I do. So I'm always picturing the little teardrop pattern on the tip of a probe. And so when I'm playing with these different things, time and intensity, I can see what's happening to my heating pattern. So if you're not visual, then draw pictures on a piece of paper, but this is kind of what you need to learn and understand. And once you do that, then it becomes easier to get to know a new machine because you kind of know how to play with time and intensity. I think that sometimes, it's while you get taught, at least most schools to a certain extent should teach you some of everything. The truth is that a student will only retain a small amount when they leave school, and that's normal. I mean, if I could have $1 for every time a student was like, "You didn't teach me this," and it's like, "No, but I did." I had someone last week said that I didn't teach them galvanic, and it's not even on the Apple's machines. And I said, "No, sweetheart,
You're like, oh, no.
Yeah, it sure is, and you sure did. But it's okay. It's not the main focus of what we do. And I realize that sometimes what that means is that you didn't do 200 hours of just straight galvanic, and so you're gonna forget that. Yes, we did teach it. Yes, you did use it. And so it's kind of normal that you'll end up forgetting some of these things after school. And so if you have to go back and you might have learned about time and intensity, but maybe your school focused more on presets, and maybe that's okay. But you need then, as a practitioner, it's your job as an electrologist out in the field to never stop learning. A lot of these things, these skills, I mean, what you're doing here right now is exactly that. But you're going to have to proactively make sure that you're seeking out that information. So if we're talking about how do you find your working point, you have to be able to understand the basics of how your current's being delivered. So
that was actually a conversation that we had the other day in regards to the new X HD, because the 10, it has all 3 megahertz. And so when you're moving from 1 megahertz to another, how that responds.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Do you understand the differences with the frequencies?
And I was like, what does my formula look like here? And so I went and did a bunch of side research, and we were like, okay, this is what, this is an understanding of it, but I still want to go meet with like an engineer and be like, how did you get to that number? Like, I want to see your formula so that I can go and do that on my side. Now, sometimes people will share that really well. Sometimes they won't, because sometimes it's like proprietary and that's why they don't tell you. But I haven't met any electrologist companies or electrolysis companies that do this in a negative light. Usually, if you bug them enough, they will give you that information because they want you happy with the product. And so that's exactly what's happening, is like we're trying to figure out like what that's going to look like, because that component is new. We haven't done these equations for a machine that can bounce back and forth, which is wildly cool, but also new. And that new is kind of scary.
Coming soon to 2026, the AES Spring Summoner, plus more virtual CEUs to keep you inspired, educated, and connected. Brought to you by Joanie Gonella and Stephanie Shields of the Electrology Education Coalition. Stay tuned and get all the updates at electrologycoalition.com.
Okay. Was there any other question on that part? I feel like...
No, I believe that was it. So...
okay, so... One of the questions that we had pop up on the online forum was, what are some of the most common mistakes that we see as teachers that new electrologists would make with their mistakes? And when I read that, the very first one was being afraid to stretch the skin. That is it's like, I have to explain often that when you're not stretching, whether that be a light stretch around the area, heavier stretch and a larger area, the pain now comes from what you're not doing. And often it's not the pressure of your hand or your stretch that is painful for that client. It is simply that you can't get into that follicle at that point. And they're going to feel the fact that you went and played pincushion around their follicle. So that's like one of the ones that popped into my head immediately. What about you?
I think that sometimes, like I tell students a lot too, that speed comes with time, so, and I feel like a lot of new electrologists try to, they get out, and I get it. I mean, you charge money for a service that is charged per time period, per 15 minutes, 30 minutes. So you want to try to get as much done as possible. But the thing is I usually explain, like, speed doesn't come from how fast I jab the probe inside the follicle. My insertion is actually still slow enough that I know if I'm perforating or not.
Yeah.
And my extraction is still delicate and slow enough that I let go of the hair, I don't pluck it out. So the speed comes from not having to judge angles, and that comes from time and experience. So sometimes I feel like they try to go too fast because you're charging, you feel bad and whatever it is. And it tends, then you sacrifice the quality of your insertions, because figuring out angles and not having to take the time to do a lot of this kind of stuff, it takes time. And by time, I mean like a year in, you're going to feel a lot more confident. 2 years in, even better. 3 years in, like you're really like feeling like you can compete, but it takes time. It's not going to happen in the first 6 months. So I think it's kind of compromising quality by trying to go fast, and that's not what speed is.
I happen to really agree with that too, because speed, it comes from how easy was it for me to work, like. Because this
positioning right to have the good access and knowing what the angle is, and so you're not spending time. I'm slower in areas where it's harder to get the right angle, because you spend more time fiddling trying to figure out angles. That's where you're slow, And so if you see people trying to go fast and all they're doing is just stabbing and then pulling the hairs out because they're yanking them out so fast, and we see a lot of that on Instagram. You guys are filming yourselves and putting it out for everybody to see. I can see a pluck from across the street. Mm-hmm. So, it's just trying to go too fast. I think that's mine.
Yeah. Slow down. It's important for you to be delicate. I don't know if anybody here likes yoga, but like we talk about practicing, like it's a yoga practice. Like when you do yoga, it's your electrology practice. It's your electrolysis practice. It's when you go to school, it's your practical, you're practicing that. I think that practice is a key component to what we do. A doctor, it's their practice. Why? Because every day is them putting in the work to make it happen. And so it's those repetitions. It is that and I know that like for that have had to take breaks in school or had to take breaks in their career, I always feel bad when I'm coming back from a break for that first client coming back, because unless I'm going to go practice on myself for a little bit and just kind of just doing some insertion practice, it's those first few insertions that get you out of that comfort that you normally do day in and day out. And so if you are feeling as though you are struggling with that, it is a matter of practicing. And over time, you get there. I don't know about you, but this happens a lot with newer electrologists, especially when we say it's as a starting point to work on yourself, just to kind of see if you're feeling an insertion or a poke, and you get to know those angles of insertion and that kind of stuff. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They're like, no, thank you. And I get it. But in the same token, I'm not saying work on your chin, but if you can try insertions on your leg or your arm so that you can start to get to know what we mean by raising and lowering your wrist, moving it from side to side to get you into those angles so that you can kind of line up nicely, or showing you how like a stretch can look in multiple different ways to get that follicle to pop open. Those are all a huge benefit.
There's a book that I read, and this was years ago, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the title. It was a bestseller, so I'm sure somebody here will remember what it's called. And it talked about like it takes about 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, and then people try to be an expert right out the gate, and that's just not feasible. So I always think about that because it's pretty interesting. I mean, 10,000 hours. Some people could get that pretty quickly, right? It's like when you're talking about practice, how often are you practicing? How many hours are you putting into your practice? Or are you, putting in, let's say you're just working a couple hours here and there, And so to get to those 10,000, and that's kind of an arbitrary number, yeah, exactly. Outliers. See, I knew somebody had the book. So it was a good book. It was very interesting. But that concept kind of stayed with me because, I mean, it's true, like don't think that right out the gate, you're going to be amazing at it until you put in the time and the effort that it takes to get you there. I think that like 10,000 hours ended up being about like 10 years or so, but just for fun, count, like if you work, how many hours of electrolysis do you do per week? And maybe take out like a couple weeks for vacations that you take every year. And like, how many hours of electrolysis would you say you do in 1 year? Just for fun. If everybody who's working here, I definitely don't do as much as I used to, but just kind of do that math and then see how many years do you think you'd have to keep up that pace in order to reach maybe that arbitrary 10,000 hours of practice,
In 2016, when we got the pros at my parents' practice, we were selling our multi-needles, and we were like, how many hours have we been working on these machines? And so we did that. We averaged out. We were like, okay, if you did 8 hours a day of like 1 hour session. So 8 hours a day of that with this many hairs per hour as your average for this many years on this machine, what it looked like. And it was like kind of cool to start seeing just how many insertions you're doing over time. And it was one of those moments where like I went and did my mother's math because like our moms have been doing this forever and a day. And it was like millions. And I'm like, that is crazy to think. Yeah. You've been zapping millions of hairs, but it's not crazy once you start to do those math. And I do like doing that. Another great book that I was just thinking about in these moments, and it is one of those ones for when you are feeling as though you haven't risen to the point where you envision yourself in your life. It's called The Big Leap. It's by Gay Hendricks, Gay. If you listen to the audiobook, which I'm an audiobook fan, it is read by him, and he has very much like that, like professor voice. But it just talks about like leveling up in your life as working not just out like inside your realm of expertise, but we work towards our realm of genius. And we are always like what we do here as electrologists, like the amount of sheer dedication we put to this is outside of expertise mode. It's in that genius mode. And the more time that you're putting towards that education, like when I think about like, like what's a common mistake that people make is like they get out of school and they go and work by themselves and they don't socialize. And you guys are not in that boat. So like when I like that we got this question because the person's being self-critical and they're like, oh, what could I do? But like really, if you think about it, you're here doing the very first step of taking advantage of expanding your mindset. But it has to be done like Kelly Noonan, which you girls have, if you haven't met her, you'll meet her at the AEA conference. She's actually here in Washington, and she and I have been like friends for years. She talked about the fact that like you simply have got to stop working as an island as an electrologist. Like we all live in these little islands, and we didn't necessarily congregate. And now we understand that we can take a boat from island to island and get to know each other. And I do recommend, as an electrologist, especially if you're a solo practitioner, is that visit one of your electrology buddies in their office and get to know things, because you're going to learn something from your buddies. You're going to learn something from your colleagues. You're going to learn something at conventions or in meetings like this that get you to that point where you're no longer alone. Let's see here. Oh gosh, there was like I have two different lists. One's from international, or not international, Information Worldwide. So I'm just pulling up the two different lists real quick because there were so many good ones. Did we talk about the full clearances in one session and the overworking of the area? I feel like that was a recent conversation.
We have, yeah, we have.
Okay, that was at the top of the list, so I don't want to go back to that one. So I would say, what are some key components in your day-to-day practice as an electrologist that you feel like you could never live without having, these 3 items in your office to make your day feel very successful? Do you have like a top 3?
Are you talking about like tools of the trade?
Tools of the trade, or like, and by tools of the trade, it could be your scheduling software. It could be, the phone system that you use, but it also could be like, these are my favorite forceps. These are my favorite filaments. These are, you have those as well.
I'm picky about tweezers.
Okay.
And it's funny because since, we're 9 electrologists in my office, but I have 3 rooms. And so what that means is that, I'm not the only person in my room with my things. But, you get used to your setup, right? I like this bottle there, that bottle there, and don't mix up, right?
Right.
Because then I'm looking for stuff. But I like the Dumonts, the OC9s, the 10s too. I don't mind the longer ones, but they have to be just the pointiest. I mean, like I have stabbed my finger and the tweezer have stayed in my finger. That's how sharp I want them. But that's because I do a lot of like very fine peach fuzz, detailed. I do get a little bit OCD, so I very much like to do perfect clearances. So very, very sharp tweezers. And I have one person in my office that I don't know if they like the H's, and which ones the H's are called them the fat tweezers.
Yeah.
And so every time I open my drawer, it's just full of those. And I'm like, no, toss them out. I think I hid them last time. I'm like, no more of those. They'll pollute my drawer. They have to be fine tipped, and the pointier the better. And I will examine every tweezer through the sterilization package, because I use the autoclave envelopes with the clear front. And so I make sure that they meet and that they are perfectly aligned, because just a tiny little notch in them and it ruins everything.
Oh my gosh. Today,
Perfection of tweezers for sure.
and I'm not going to make her show her face, but today Sandy and I were laughing because she had a pair of tweezers that at some point somebody had like dropped those bad boys, and they were like a little tulip just going outbound. And it was very funny, but I know how to I can buff those ones out, but I would prefer to send them out to the Express Instrument Services. I also obsessed with OC9s, and I had the girl who worked for me at the beginning of the year. She was just doing extra hours, and she loved the H's, and I was just like, oh my gosh, please. I just
don't know your kind.
Yeah, I don't know your kind.
Hey, you know what?
And Charity's like, H is my jam. I'm like,
yeah, right. The Dumont H's are not so bad. They tend to be a little pointier, but I just feel like they're so bulky. And, like I just rip out 3 hairs for every one that I'm trying to get. And that frustrates me. There's nothing worse. There's nothing better to ruin my day than accidentally plucking out a hair.
Yeah. That's like womp womp.
Yeah.
I think that my big thing, and I know this, I'm obsessed with magnification to the point where my eye doctor was like, I'm like, I need readers. And he's like, no, you don't. And I'm like, yes, I do. Because I just want everything in my face. Now I do need readers. So I will say that like, you will see me wearing glasses all the time now because it's a necessity. But I love crisp, clear magnification with like a nice focal point light. Oh, like that's the stuff that my dreams are made out of. Is just that clarity that I can see from space. So I need them light because my nose bridge is pretty sensitive. And the back of my ears, I don't know if anybody else has bony ears. Like they're not bony, it's cartilage. But like I have like hard.
So Stephanie has bones.
I have bones in my ears. On the outside. I mean the cartilage part. But like the cartilage part is like super hard back there. And if I don't have something that is soft on the back of my ear, especially if it's a heavy loop, you might as well just like that the day of my death is that moment right there. I just can't stand it. I don't want to live with those on my ears.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's probably my big thing. As for like admin stuff, mag light, do I recommend? Do you mean like the round ones that you're looking through? There's
It's more showpiece for me. I rarely. It's. I mean, I have like I've definitely switched over to LED.
Yeah.
But the AFMA. Go ahead, Anita.
No, the ones that I have is fluorescent, so it flickers when you're taking pictures. And I actually use loops now, and I've got that light from the loop, which is also great. But I also want something else to just like Stephanie. I just like it super bright, like as though I'm taking a porn video here.
So, the AFMA, like the Dectra one with the LEDs, I think is a pretty nice one. The new one, like that you can just kind of grab onto and it moves every which way. That's the one I have at my office, and it does the trick, So
that Omega one from Silhouette Tone's pretty cool. I just like the size of the mag light or magnification in the middle. That being said, I don't use it, and so I don't know why. If I were to use it, I want it to be like the whole thing. There was a light, and it was probably one of my favorites, but I feel like it was not constructed well. It was too heavy. That was from the Daylight Company.
The Italian one, the metal one.
Yeah, and it had
all the different lighting options.
Yes. That thing was so amazing, but
it was like $500 and something. Well, that was years ago. I don't remember how much it was now.
I would have to go find the name of that one, but it was it just had like you had multiple settings. You could dim the lights on there.
Yeah.
You could cut, so like it had basically 9 lights around the ring. And so you could have lights coming from this side, lights coming from this side, this, all of it at once. You can dim it, raise it back up. It was so lovely. But I do think that it was too heavy of a light. So that
it was, and it broke. I remember mine didn't last that long. And it was all metal. It was like it seemed like it was well made, but it didn't last, I feel.
No.
For the price
not for the price that we paid. Like, because I think it was $600, and I just felt like if I'm going to spend $600, I want that thing to last, especially if you're metal. I need you to last a lifetime once you're metal, because it was frustrating. They did have a good warranty though, so yeah.
That's all we got for today.
Okay, so next week, same bat time, same bat channel. And normally, oh my gosh, I was about to do it with my students. I'm like, code word of the day is, for those who don't watch it live, I make them all have a code word, and then I get it spammed to me. I won't do that to you guys. But I am excited to see you guys at the AEA convention if you're going to be there. We've got, Joanie, our meet and greet.
That's right. Yes, we have our meet and greet. So it's planned. We are going to be meeting on Friday, November 1st at 5:30 p.m. So the last lecture ends at 5:15, and we're just going to go to the bar in the hotel. Yeah. And so
hopefully those of you, members that are here or that will be at the convention, we'll see you there. We'll probably hang out for about an hour. So let's just chat. Why not?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
And we can all thank Crystal for this. Crystal B over in the corner of the screen. She was like, we need to do this. And so Joanie and I had to move a few of the things around to make it happen, but we are excited. So thank you, Crystal, for the recommendation. All right. Peace, love, and hair removal from Steph.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Have a good evening. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone who shared experiences and helped build confidence in areas where many feel underprepared.